Sacsayhuaman, probably one of the oldest constructions on planet Earth, evidence of an ancient lost civilization. And to understand these megalithic structures, you really need to understand ley lines. And to understand ley lines, you really need to understand prana, or chi, and how it flows. Just as we have nadis, or meridians, in our subtle body, the Earth in its subtle body also has meridians, or energy channels, nadis. And when, just as in our body, when the Ida and Pingala cross, there is a chakra, or a wheel of energy. And likewise, the Earth has an energy grid, and when two of these ley lines cross paths, it creates a vortex, or a Earth chakra. And the ancients understood this, and they built these giant megalithic structures here in these power places to harness and concentrate this prana into one energy source that they could use for their ceremonies and to elicit higher states of consciousness. See these strange nodes on stones that no one really is able to explain. They're always at the bottom of the stone, which is interesting. And you find these nodes in other places where they had the same polygonal cyclopean megaliths. No one's really sure of the purpose, but someone with technology this advanced obviously would have smoothed them down if they didn't have a purpose. So obviously they were used for something. Here's an example of sort of a dolmen structure that you would see at Stonehenge, the British Isles, even in New England, Malta, other places. You can see here a reconstruction where they've put an Inca roof on top of a non-Inca structure. Here we can see the large open green space or plaza in the middle of the temple structure. Could easily fit thousands of people here for gathering ceremonies in antediluvian times. Probably there were important people from all over the planet that came here pre-cataclysm. So you'll hear a lot of the tour guides here talking about how these are Inca structures, only a few hundred years old, and that they were all made with bronze chisels and ropes, brought here by ropes. But there's more and more people, I think, that are discovering the truth about these super ancient structures. The scale of this construction is mesmerizing. It's definitely a power place. It's supercharged. I feel the energy here. The ancients knew about ley lines, earth meridians, and they knew about the vortices where the ley lines crossed and created earth chakras. And they used these stones, which hold memory and hold power and harness power and increase power, to create an even stronger power place. Just like if you were to put, you know, a piece of quartz on a chakra to increase the power of that chakra or something. It's the same idea, but on a much larger scale. It's just absolutely magnificent. If this isn't evidence of a highly advanced lost civilization, I'm not sure what is. Some of these rocks are just absolutely huge. Yeah, okay. Señor José.
Es esta de acá. El ojo, la boca, la lengua, la línea, el cuerpo viene por el estómago del puma.
The serpiente, the snake.
El cuello. Están unidas prácticamente con el puma. Están juntas, ¿no? Y el puma es esta de acá.
Ya.
¿Puede coger esta, por favor, para que lo puedas firmar primero?
Sí.
Ya.
El puma
La
ahora.
cabeza es esta de acá.
Sí,
Nariz, ojo, raya y piedra pequeña arriba, la oreja.
claro.
El cuello por 3 piedras, el pecho y estas 2 piedras, la pata en forma de descanso. Lomo al ras de la cabeza, estómago esta línea, hasta esta parte que es la segunda pata, sube y la cola por 3 piedras. 1, 2 y 3, la de encima en forma de U.
¿Y el cóndor? Hay un cóndor, ¿cierto?
Había.
Ya.
Pero ya no hay, porque en la conquista, cuando llegan los españoles, destruyen gran cantidad del palacio y construyen encima lo que es una iglesia. Entonces el cóndor sería las patas, esta piedra parada y aquella de allá. Entonces el cuerpo vendría arriba, pero como lo destruyeron ya no se puede distinguir, ya no se puede.
Y esta aquí es la cola de cóndor, ¿cierto?
Claro, esa sería la cola del cóndor. Esa de allá.
¿Y son las piernas?
La pierna y la otra.
Los dos.
Sí, allá otra.
Yeah. So we're again at this famous wall near the main plaza in Cusco. Super ancient, polygonal, cyclopean, megalithic, earthquake-proof, thousands and thousands of years old, probably from the Atlantean age. Senor Jose just demonstrated to us the shapes or the figures in the wall. There's a puma, there's a snake, and there's a condor. And those are the 3 main animal totems or symbols of Inca culture, but it's pre-Inca. Yeah? So we're looking at something that is super ancient, the symbolism of the 3 animals, with the puma, the snake, and the condor. And it represents 3 levels of existence, or 3 planes, or 3 dimensions of existence. It's very interesting because it has a parallel with the yoga tradition, which has 3 planes or dimensions. The physical plane, which would be the serpent, the astral plane, which would be the puma, and the condor, which would be the causal plane. And so it's very interesting the parallels between these ancient civilizations, one from India, the other one here in Peru, probably had a common ancestor, a common link, where, and in Christianity, we also see the Trinity, the Holy Trinity. And so this cosmology of the 3 levels of existence, or the 3 planes, is something super, super ancient, a vestige from the Atlantean civilization that we see here represented in these megalithic walls. So are we looking here at Atlantean technology, ruins from an antediluvian civilization, pre-comet, pre-flood, pre-devastation? Could be anywhere from 10 to 12,000 years old, possibly. We see the perfect seams in between the rocks. You can see a little movement here from an earthquake. These are earthquake-proof walls that have lasted thousands of years, if not 10 to 12,000 years. And it's interesting, we just saw this cosmology of the condor, the puma, and the serpent represented in the walls with Senor Jose. And if you look at my ring here, you can also see the same symbolism, the puma, the serpent, and the condor. And these 3 animals represent 3 layers or 3 dimensions of existence. And it's very interesting to see the parallels between the Christian Trinity and in yoga, the physical plane, the causal plane, the astral plane. You have 3 planes of existence also. And so is this cosmology of 3 planes of existence a vestige from a super ancient civilization that's found its way into various traditions all over the planet, from India to Israel to Peru? And it's fascinating to see the parallels in the traditions. These stones are huge. There's no telling how many tons each one of these is, and this is just part of a wall in Cusco near the main plaza. that has been here for thousands of years that people obviously built over and reconstructed parts of the wall. The Inca as well as the Spanish. Very crude, rudimentary structures from the Inca and Spanish. This is super high tech. And you can see the surfaces are smoothed over. Looks like they're polished with a technology that we don't know about, we don't know what they used. You see these strange knobs, these strange protuberances, and they could have been for keeping time, calendar of sorts. We're not sure. But this is definitely evidence of a highly advanced lost civilization that was destroyed probably 10 to 12,000 years ago. If you look at Arthur Panansky's work from Bolivia, Tiwanaku looks like it's probably 12,000 years old. Also, if you look at just the geology of the area, Lake Titicaca used to be on the shores of Pumapunku. It's dropped 100 feet. If you ask geologists how long that takes, supposedly takes about 10,000 years for that to occur. Obviously Tiwanaku is super ancient. This is super ancient. We're looking at the vestiges of a highly, highly advanced civilization called Atlantis, call it Lemuria, Mu, whatever. But we've lost a lot of wisdom and a lot of technology. I've just had an interesting insight about these knobs, protuberances you see all over Cusco and the surrounding areas and all the megaliths. What if these knobs were used for climbing and they were actually using these knobs as footholds and handholds to climb the walls, to do whatever work they had to do on the wall more easily? It looks to me a lot like the footholds and handholds you see in modern climbing gyms that people use for climbing rock walls. So it's very possible that these are actually footholds and handholds used for climbing the walls to do whatever reparation needed to be done at the time or in the original construction of the walls. Here we can see the difference on this side of the alleyway, the more ancient construction. And on this side you see more of the Tiwanaku civilization construction. And these are blocks, rectangles, squares. This is more of a jigsaw puzzle with very odd geometry. It's very different. It almost looks like the rocks were melted into place. Here we are at the Church Santo Domingo, Iglesia Santo Domingo. And inside is the Coricancha, or sort of the navel of the earth, the center of the world for the Inca people. This seems to be fairly ancient stonework here. You see some of the notches, but this is not polygonal. It's very perfect in its construction, and a little bit confused as to whether or not this was super ancient or possibly the Tiwanaku civilization that created this. It's almost like a mix between the two, like a transition period or something. It's pretty interesting. These photos were taken inside the temple of the Coricancha, which is in the Santo Domingo Spanish church. The craftsmanship is amazing. Here you see detailed cuts into stones, and they used clamps to hold stones together. The only other place you see these types of clamps is ancient Egypt, and also over at Pumapunku, Tiwanaku. And it's a very beautiful structure. The temple is known as the Coricancha, but there's also a specific stone in the middle of the Coricancha, also known as the Coricancha, which is this right here. The stone is in the shape of an octagon. No one's exactly sure what it was used for, but it was considered the navel, or the center of the world for the Inca and their predecessors. So we're here in Pisaq. For example, between this construction here, it's a lot more perfected. The rocks are a lot bigger, and then you see the later Inca construction above it. For me, this is evidence that there were at least two cultures here. We're here at the Fuentes, Pisaq. These sacred fountains. These were used as baths of purification for the Inca. And this is considered water, feminine water, agua femenina, because it's subterranean, and the agua masculino, or masculine water, is from snow and los nevados, so the snow-capped peaks where the water originates. Here we are at Ollantaytambo. We're about to climb all these steps here. See the differences in the construction here. And the additions above, these rounded corners here. Pretty amazing construction. Obviously very different from the Inca construction. Huge stones. These rocks here are huge. Cyclopean megaliths. Huge stones. Absolutely impossible to move during Inca times. Massive. Perfect angles. Similar to what we saw in Pumapunku, Tiwanaku. Very impressive. These are the ones I've been waiting to see. They moved these from several kilometers away across the river and somehow moved them up a giant mountain. In person, it's very impressive. There's just no way that people carried these or used tree trunks or ropes with. It's just impossible. I have no explanation, but it's certainly not the typical explanation given. Cyclopean megaliths, finally. I get to see the real deal. Been waiting a long time for this. Dream come true. Can't believe I'm finally here. Getting to see these artifacts from an ancient advanced civilization. Atlantis, Lemuria, whatever you want to call it. Doesn't really matter. But we've lost a lot of knowledge, let's just say that. Lost a lot of magic. This is the 10 windows where they put idols. If you ohm inside one of them, it's ridiculously loud. Pretty cool. Probably some of the oldest constructions on planet Earth we're seeing here. It's a rock very similar to what you see at Pumapunku. Perfect angles. Very smooth. These apparently were just sort of leftover rocks as part of the construction. Never got put into place. They were left down here. Here we have some examples of some polygonal walls with Inca walls adjacent. A giant megalith under that Inca wall there, huge. We have a typical fountain that you see at a lot of the sites here. All of these really ancient sites are always built next to fountains of really pure flowing water. Had a practical purpose for drinking clean, pure water to stay healthy, but also probably a religious, spiritual purpose as well for purification. Here you can see an example of how they used the bedrock and didn't remove the bedrock. Left it in place to respect Pachamama, Mother Earth. They always built on top of the bedrock. Here in Tambo Machai you can see 3 distinct types of construction. Got a giant megalith up at the top, and then smaller polygonal from a different civilization, and then the Inca construction under it. So you can see really all 3 time periods or ages represented here. You can see the original giant polygonal Cyclopean megalithic construction and this wall here, and then you can see the later Inca work below it. 2 very, very different types of construction from 2 very different civilizations, 2 very different time periods. Perfect ancient plumbing. So we're here at Tambo Machai looking at this original wall up above with giant polygonal megalithic blocks. And all of these structures were built along a ley line called the Path of Viracocha. It goes from Tiwanaku and Lake Titicaca, Pumapunku, straight across through Peru to all the megalithic sites around Cusco and the Sacred Valley. And it's a straight earth nadi, or subtle channel of subtle earth energies that they built all of these megalithic constructions upon. The ancients had knowledge of the flow of subtle energy along the earth, and they built their structures accordingly. And probably there's another ley line that crosses around Cusco, because there's so many megaliths here, that creates an earth chakra, and they use these giant stones to amplify the effects of this earth chakra. The ancient megalith constructors around Cusco and the Sacred Valley always built their sites next to a freshwater stream such as this one. These were Gardens of Eden, just an absolute paradise. So Sri Yukteswar, in his famous text, The Holy Science, decoded the ancient Vedic tradition of the yugas, or eras, or epochs, or cycles in time. And one of these cycles, or eras, is a golden age. And we're looking here, especially if you look at the original wall, at an example of something probably built during this golden age, some 10,000, 12,000 years ago. Nobody knows exactly for sure. This golden age was ended by a giant cataclysm, a comet or asteroid or something, at the end of the Younger Dryas, which is the last ice age, that created a deep freeze and then a great sudden thaw that created giant global floods that wiped out many of the civilizations along the coastlines, like in India, for example, where you find super old cities underwater off the coast. However, here in Peru and Bolivia, we're up, right now 12,000 feet above sea level, and while the cataclysm, I'm sure, did affect people involved with the builders of these monuments, here at 12,000 feet with these earthquake-proof walls, we have preserved remnants of this golden age, of this advanced civilization, the civilization that understood the energy currents that flow within the earth, ley lines, vortexes, earth chakras, and they built their sites here to harness the power of the planet and perform their religious rites and to quicken their spiritual evolution. When you're in a power place such as this, that resonates with such a high vibration, you can quicken your spiritual evolution. The ancients knew this. That's why they built their sites along these sacred energy nadis, these earth nadis and earth chakras. Here we are at Puka Pukara, which is a primarily Incan construction, but you do see some perfectly hewn stones here. The typical entranceway to an Incan construction. We do see some signs, however, this wall here, of the more ancient polygonal megalithic type of construction. So it's highly possible that there was at one time a much larger megalithic construction in this area. There's an interesting passage from one of the earliest Spanish chroniclers and historians of the Inca, where he talks about the Incan priests that he encountered. He said they did not use drugs or alcohol. He said they were vegetarians. He said they would go on long-term retreats out into the wilderness by themselves to practice contemplation. This sounds an awful lot to me like a yogi, what we would consider to be a yogi. Vegetarian, clean lifestyle, meditation, contemplation, time in nature. So it's very interesting that the Inca priests had this tradition, probably most likely handed down from their ancient ancestors, the Tiwanaku people, and before that, whoever built the Cyclopean megaliths here, Atlantis, or whatever you want to call it. It's interesting that India has this these same practices, yogic practices. These traditions, these practices had been handed down by sort of secret groups of Andean priests living high in the Andes Mountains for hundreds, if not thousands of years, much like we see in the Himalayas. And so is it possible that both of these ancient traditions, these yogic practices of contemplation, meditation, clean diet, are from a common source, a common ancestor, and we're seeing relics, we're seeing remnants of that? I think so. I think it's evidence of a pre-existing civilization that was destroyed in later times. And the way that the chronicler describes these priests is a far cry from the shamans and priests you see around Cusco now, who hand out super powerful drugs to any tourist that wants them, like their Tylenol, So it's very interesting to see the connection between the Incan Andean tradition and the Himalayan tradition. Very similar, according to this early chronicler. It looks here as though the Inca builders of this site found some older polygonal rocks that had been shaped previously by more advanced technology, and then they stuck these rough-hewn rocks around the polygonal rocks that they had found. So they were using some old leftover materials from the megalith builders here at this Inca site. Here we are at Kenko, and see some interesting carvings carved out of the bedrock here. And there are some huge rock outcrops here that were considered sacred. Very close to Cusco, very close to Sacsayhuaman. Here you can see how close we are to Cusco. Just perched on a hill right above town. These rock outcrops where supposedly the Inca took their royalty and mummified them here. You can see how they carved. Nobody knows exactly how they cut these rocks, but we'll say they carved them or used some type of high tech to cut the bedrock. This is super hard rock here that they were cutting giant chunks out of. Really impressive. You can see here, it looks like the seats, tables, carved out of the rock. Huge blocks all over the place. This is a mausoleum, ancient mausoleum, used by the Inca and probably more ancient civilizations previous to them. Some huge, huge blocks down here. The typical polish, perfection of the ancients. This is cut straight out of the bedrock. Almost perfect angles with a very smooth finish. Similar to Egyptian crypts and mausoleums. Here is what the top of Kenko looks like. Unfortunately, they no longer allow people to go up there. But you can see how they carved straight out of the bedrock. Right up on top of that rock is where all the very unique carvings are. One of the strangest places I've ever been. From this vantage point, you are able to see a few of the carved staircases or whatever they were on top of the bedrock here at Kenko. Unfortunately, they no longer allow people to climb up there and explore and look around. That's okay. They're preserving the site for future generations, and that's a good thing. Here we see what is probably the oldest part of Kenko. See some of the polygonal, huge stones here. The question is, were these builders, these megalith builders, somehow related to traditions of Egypt, traditions of India, traditions of Sumeria? We find a lot of similarities in their cosmology. In the Hindu tradition, there's Brahma, Shiva, Vishnu. In the Christian tradition, we have the Holy Trinity. In the Yoga tradition, we have the three planes and also the three gunas. And it's very interesting that obviously the people that lived here had a very specialized knowledge of subtle energy and how to work with subtle energy, how to work with the earth grid of ley lines or earth nadis. And really the best way to understand these earth nadis is to experience the prana flow in your own nadis. And really the best way I've found to do that is Kriya Yoga and the techniques of Kriya Yoga. if you really want to know what it's like to feel prana flowing through your Ida Nadi, Pingala Nadi, Sushumna Nadi, I highly recommend Kriya Yoga. I'm sure the ancients were doing something very similar to Kriya Yoga, and they had very, very advanced knowledge of subtle energies, both in their own bodies as well as the planetary energies, the planetary ley lines or nadis, and the earth chakras, where they built their temples in holy places. And I really believe that the Himalayan yogi and the Andean priest were practicing similar things in ancient times, and that these practices and techniques were passed down through secret lineages high in the Andes, high in the Himalayas, but they come from a common source. And that common source is Atlantis, whatever you want to call it, but it was a highly advanced lost civilization. Here we see a view of Cusco from Kenko up on top of this hill, and there's a sort of a hidden wall, polygonal wall down there in between Kenko and Sacsayhuaman that we're about to go check out. We've walked down to this wall in between Sacsayhuaman and Kenko. It's known as Kenko Chico, this site, and that rock right there is ridiculously huge. I doubt a modern crane could even lift it. And again we see more of the Cyclopean, megalithic, polygonal construction from a highly advanced ancient civilization that practiced energy work, practiced meditation, practiced yoga. See some scale there. My wife, Carolina. Size of these stones, that's bedrock there. She's next to now. But this was built right into the bedrock. Indiana Carolina, I call her. And we're gonna follow this path along here. See some more megaliths. These people that built these walls had advanced knowledge of astronomy, astrology, subtle energy, the Prana Kosha, or the subtle body, the nadis, the chakras, the earth nadis, the earth chakras, Earth's subtle system, how to manipulate the Earth's energy, how to manipulate vibration, frequency, to move these stones and shape these stones most likely. Here you see some of the formations at Kenko Chico that are very similar to the formations at the top of Kenko that we are not allowed to visit. A lot of interesting stonework here. See a lot of interesting carvings out of the bedrock. Carvings, I say carvings. Not really sure how they did it. Sure wasn't a bronze chisel, I'll tell you that. Very strange place. Some interesting carvings. Looks like a seat to me. Like somewhere a priest would sit and meditate, do a spiritual work. This amazing view that you can't really see right now because it's raining. Altar. This to me looks like a place where a master would sit and contemplate, meditate. Doesn't really look to me like a place where sacrifices were performed. Perhaps the Inca later on used this space as a place to sacrifice animals to their gods, but Certainly in ancient times, pre-Inca. I don't think it was used for that at all. These look like seats. These look like meditation spaces for master Andean Yogis of the Atlantean epic to come and do their spiritual practices, pray, contemplate, do energy work. This magnificent carving right here. Just incredible. This is very hard rock we're looking at here, not easy to carve. Not sure what it is on the Mohs scale, but certainly don't think bronze chisels would do the trick. Another meditation seat. Another one. You have anything to say, Indiana Carolina, about this site?
It's pretty interesting because you can see the very this rock is very rough, but then you have that rock down there
Perfectly smooth and polished.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I wonder what kind of technique, and if it was Inca or pre-Inca.
I'm sure it was pre-Inca.
But how were they like
Nobody knows.
working the stone?
Nobody knows. There's a double seat. Seats on either side. Here on this rock at Kenko Chico, we see these perfectly drilled holes. 1, 2, 3, 4. Looks like machine work to me, if I've ever seen it. Here's Carolina sitting on one of the meditation thrones. To me, this doesn't look like a sacrificial space. This looks like the throne of an enlightened master or avatar from the Golden Age.
And it has the 3 levels.
Yes, it has the three levels or 3 dimensions of existence represented that they had high knowledge of. And so did the Himalayan tradition, which means that they probably had a common source